Hi, my name is Gianotti.
And I'm Lillian Sachitano.
And we are your hosts for tonight's Environmental Film Festival. Yes, I'm so glad we're here.
Woohoo!
Each student in our class, EVS 151, has created a capstone project video, which is either creative or informative, which tells us all about their passions.
Within the environmental science degree, there are 3 tracks that students can choose to specialize in: biology, geography, and geology. As you move through the videos tonight, it might be apparent of what track each student is in based off how they choose to express their passions and what they find interesting. We are so thankful that you are here with us tonight, taking some time out of your evening to hang out with us. So please enjoy, and we hope that you're able to find something to benefit from.
Our first videos will be from students in the biology track. Enjoy.
Yeehaw!
Albert Einstein, a Nobel Peace Prize-winning physicist, once said, "If the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man would have no more than 4 years left to live." This isn't true, and Albert Einstein never said that. But this fictitious quote does evoke an important idea. When bees come to mind, you may imagine a summer day gone awry with a painful sting. While this negative interaction is a common occurrence, bees support our lives in tremendous ways behind the scenes. For every 3 bites of food you take, one of those depended on the pollination of bees to make it to that plate. These small buzzing insects allow for 85% of the different crops we eat to grow, accounting for $235 to $577 billion in annual global profit. So, if widespread life is currently possible because of bees, is there an issue? In today's world, bees are facing declines in both population and diversity of species. The number of species found in the 2000s dropped 25% from the number of species found in the 1990s. Having a greater diversity of bee species is important to both bee survival and plant production. An environment that boasts more bee diversity can expect to see stabler population levels among bees, as well as increased yields of fruit and seeds in the surrounding flora. Among the reasons for seeing bees die out globally are habitat loss, invasive species, disease, pesticide use, and climate change. To grasp the seriousness of this issue, let's imagine what would happen if bees were wiped off the face of the planet. While the human race may not be completely eradicated in this scenario like the internet's Einstein predicts, it would create a more desolate and bland world. Plants are able to sexually reproduce in more than one way, so pollination by bees is not necessary for every single plant to survive. This would leave the human diet with major food staples such as wheat and corn that do not require bees to grow. Some flowering species dependent on bees could be pollinated manually by human labor. However, the time and intensity of this method would lead to these foods becoming part of a high-priced and exclusive market. The common diet of the world would have to turn away from many fruits and vegetables and survive on less colorful and less nutritious meals. Not only would a vast variety of foods become relatively inaccessible, but the products associated with them, such as cosmetics and medication, would become equally as expensive and hard to find. Also, it's just as important to think about the lives of non-human creatures that would be affected without bees to sustain their ecosystem. Ecosystems will globally see population decline from hunger. With fewer individuals able to survive, countless genera will lose biodiversity, spiraling them into further population decline. All in all, there will be too many mouths to feed and not enough food naturally being created. In order to avoid such a bleak and grim future, humanity needs to begin taking steps to ensure bees stick around. A key move in protecting bees is protecting the environments they call home. Slowing or reversing habitat destruction can prevent colonies of wild bees from being destroyed. Offering bees more food can also help slow down population decline through means such as intercropping with flowering species, planting community and home wildflower gardens, and creating nectar wells. Ample food supply from a variety of sources will allow bees to reproduce even in less than ideal conditions. Direct management can be implemented with human knowledge to further push bees from extinction. Beekeepers can now remotely monitor hives to become aware of possible colony collapsing events and take action to change its outcome. Medication can be given to colonies to fight parasites as opposed to hazardous pesticide practices. Queens can be selected for a hive that have a high affinity for cleanliness that can ward off parasites and diseases. Continuing technological improvements in these methods would allow for humanity to begin righting the wrong of setting bees on a path of destruction. If we want to see our world grow stronger than it is now, we need to begin by saving the backbone of our ecosystem: the bee.
Hello everybody, my name is Kody Barone and I will be discussing mangroves in a changing climate. Well, what are mangroves exactly? Mangroves are trees or shrubs that live along the coast, making them halophytes, which means that they are adapted to live in places where water is extremely salty. That means that mangroves have a lot of adaptations to survive living in the ocean, such as extruding salt through their leaves or growing their roots above ground to collect oxygen. The reason I wanted to study mangroves is because they are very valuable to coastal ecosystems, one such example being that mangroves provide habitat to many marine animals such as fish and birds. Mangroves also provide protection from tropical storms by being a buffer between the waves and the coastline, making them a very important resource for people living along the coast. Lastly, mangroves are able to store carbon in the soil. This carbon is known as coastal blue carbon, and in fact, mangroves can actually store more carbon per area when compared to terrestrial forests. So, where are mangroves found exactly? As I had stated earlier, mangroves live on the coast. However, they are only found along coasts near the equator. This is because mangroves thrive in high temperatures. In fact, some studies have found that certain species of mangroves can't function in temperatures lower than -7 degrees Celsius. And if you look on this map, mangroves in Texas are at their most northern extent of their range. So, if temperatures are such an important factor to mangrove function, what happens to mangroves when the climate begins to change? Particularly, how are mangroves impacted by freeze events? This question came to my mind after the freeze event that happened in Texas in 2021, where temperatures dropped around -8 degrees Celsius. I decided that I wanted my capstone project to be monitoring mangrove health before and after this freeze event. So I headed down to the University of Texas Marine Science Institute in Port Aransas to see how this freeze event impacted the mangroves living there. And what I found might be shocking. So on the left is mangroves in Port Aransas pre-freeze fall 2020. As you can see, they're green, they're thriving, they're alive. And on the right is post-freeze, February 2022. So this is a full year after the freeze event. So not only did the mangroves die, but they have not come back even a full year after. So, if freeze events in Texas increase in frequency and intensity due to anthropogenic climate change, how might this affect Texas's coast? Since mangroves provide a carbon sink, coastal protection, and habitat, it's important that we try and save mangroves from being pushed out of Texas.
Hi, my name is Corey Navarro, and I am a senior at UT and an EVS biology track major. And for my capstone project, I worked with the Watershed Protection Department at the City of Austin. They brainstormed various tactics towards removing woody invasive species from a designated study site in East Austin, Texas. Invasive species can be animals or plants that are from another region that don't belong in their new environment. They can be harmful towards an ecosystem because they easily overgrow and take out native species, which are necessary towards the health of an ecosystem. Here are some pictures of some common Texas invasive species that y'all may be familiar with. The traditional method towards removing woody invasive species usually involves herbicides and machinery. These two methods can actually disrupt the ecosystem by introducing harmful chemicals and/or physical damage through heavy machinery. The particular invasive species treated in this study was the glossy privet. The team decided to look at girdling these invasives and creating a gap in the canopy cover by removing tall invasive species. Girdling looks like this, and this ring around the trunk severs the bark and doesn't allow the bark to grow back. This slowly ends up killing the species. Creating a gap in the canopy of the trees allows for sunlight to reach various seedlings and saplings, which is crucial for these young species to mature. The team recorded initial measurements for various native and invasive species over 12 control and 12 treatment plots in this study site. The data collection spanned for around 5 years to give the native species a chance to adapt to these changes. After recorded various things such as diameter, height, abundance, sapling counts, and seedling counts, I have been analyzing the data to see if the girdling and gap treatment has had a positive impact on the native species. The native species that were focused on in this study were gumboley, cedar elm, and possum haw. By using a Bayesian approach to analyze the impacts of removing invasives, we did not see much of a difference in the height and diameter of the three native species. We also did not really see a significant difference in the abundance and richness between the treatment and the control plots. What we did see a difference is that only 60% of the native saplings survived in the control plots, while 83% of native seedlings saplings, were able to survive in the treatment plots. This means that by using these techniques, native saplings may have more luck maturing and surviving. It is important that we continue to be diligent towards limiting the chances of introducing various invasive species to our ecosystem. Certain steps and a little bit of research can help Texas stay diverse and flourishing. Thank you so much.
Water. It's the basis for life on Earth and a vital resource. It's what keeps us alive. Nobody likes dirty water, especially the organisms that have to live there. Hi, I'm Lane Morgan, and I study at the University of Texas at Austin in the Environmental Science program. There are all kinds of organisms I've found that live in local Austin creeks, but I study mayflies and damselflies. Mayflies and damselflies start their lives in the water and can live there for many years. Once they're old enough, they'll leave the water and change into an adult with wings. Some mayflies live for 24 hours once they leave the stream, and some damselflies live for a few seasons or years. I study the gut microbiomes of young mayflies and damselflies. A gut microbiome is a collection of bacteria that live in the guts of an organism. Gut microbiomes defend the host insect against disease and supplements their nutrition. In addition to these benefits, we also know that insect microbiomes are very sensitive to disruption. In a world that's continually suffering from pollution and contamination into aquatic ecosystems, the outlook isn't too good for the gut bacteria of mayflies and damselflies. Ultimately, we care because these bugs tell us how healthy our creeks are, which directly impacts our quality of life. To understand how pollution affects the gut bacteria of aquatic insects, I first collected insects from 6 creeks in Austin, Texas, using different collection methods. We then preserved our insects and brought them back to the lab. Next, we identified them, taking plenty of notes along the way. We performed several experiments in the lab to isolate the bacterial DNA so we could tell what bacteria were living in the guts of our insects. We plugged this DNA data into a program called R and used computer code to analyze the results. Here's a visualization of all the bacteria we found living in our insects. Each vertical bar is one insect, and how bright the squares are means how much of that bacteria was found. Although this is only the first step of our analysis, the clear similarities in bacterial composition for each insect species is an important base for our next steps. We plan to keep analyzing this data in order to fully answer how the gut microbiota of aquatic insects is affected by pollution.
Managing a habitat for an endangered Texas bird. This is an oak leaf. And this is a juniper sapling. A sapling is a young tree. Oak and juniper trees dominate the Texas Hill Country. In the Texas Hill Country, there is a piece of conservation land called Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge. It looks like this, and this, and this. The refuge is run by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and it was actually established for conservation of the golden-cheeked warbler. The warbler nests and forages in adult oak and juniper trees. In central Texas, adult oak trees are dying, and ecologists are worried that there won't be enough saplings to replace them. This could lead to the warbler losing the habitat it needs. The warbler is only found in central Texas, so if we lost its habitat, we'd lose a bird with Texan heritage. To help maintain adult oak trees, fire and deer were tested in an experiment. Not this kind of fire, though. More like this kind of fire, a prescribed fire. A prescribed fire is a fire controlled by land managers. They can help clear enough plants so that oak saplings can receive enough light to grow into adults. As for deer, they can eat a lot of plants that aren't too high off the ground. These plants can include oak saplings. So the deer were treated with fencing. Deer fencing is pretty expensive, and farmers and ranch owners use it to keep deer in or out of certain areas. You can buy it from sites like this one that sell farm products. In this experiment, the fencing was placed around certain plots of land to keep deer out to see what kind of effect that would have on light availability. This chart is a box plot, and it shows the mean canopy openness by treatment in this study area. In simpler terms, it shows how much light is getting to the plants at the bottom of the woodland as a percentage. If there was nothing blocking the sunlight at all, 100% of it would reach these plants. If you put a box over the ground, then 0% of it would reach them. Here we see that fencing caused there to be less light available to plants on the ground, meaning there were more plants in the understory blocking their light. This could mean that without deer eating them, these plants were left to grow unchecked. We also see that burning seemed to increase light for the plants on the ground. This could mean burning cleared a lot of the plants in the understory so that small saplings could get light now. Hopefully the refuge can find a way to take information like this and keep oak and juniper woodlands just that, oak and juniper. Then birders will be able to visit the refuge and spot the warbler in the future, and signs like this will always make sense.
Scientific communication through social media channels with Maddie Howard. Communicating science can be tricky, especially through social media channels where space is limited and everyone in the world can access it. Journal articles, scientific posters, and scientific presentations have all been done for years and years, so scientists can easily find a format or template that works for them. But social media hasn't been around for nearly as long. Is there a perfect formula for success as a scientist on social media? I sat down with communications professionals to understand how to best communicate scientific findings through social media channels and how it benefits the general public. Here's what I found. Define your goal. This is the first and most important step to creating a positive online experience. Share your results first. In scientific literature, we are used to seeing pages and pages worth of information before we get to the result. Time and space are limited on social media, so we need to jump straight to the results. Offer visuals. You will likely get more interactions with your post if you include interesting or informative visuals. Provide solutions, especially if you are also stating a problem. No one likes to feel helpless or attacked on social media. Only talking about problems will make you seem like a Debbie Downer, no matter how true or important the problems are. Providing solutions empowers your audience. Don't be afraid to follow trends. There are plenty of trends scientists can join, like Fossil Friday or Map Monday. Or feel free to tailor a trend to your own research. Have fun with it. Be yourself. It's important that scientists can be authentic when they are online, so audience sees scientists as people too. This builds credibility with your audience. These are just some of the steps to help a scientist navigate scientific communication through social media. As social media becomes more and more of a news outlet, it is important that scientists are present in that space, providing information and solutions. Thank you for letting me walk you through scientific communication through social media channels.
Hi, I'm Mike Hansen, a senior environmental science student at the University of Texas with a concentration in biology. Climate change is an issue that most of us are surely aware of, but what lies at the heart of this pernicious threat? The sun emits energy in the form of ultraviolet or UV radiation, which the Earth reflects back to space as infrared radiation. Greenhouse gases, simply put, are molecules of gas in the atmosphere capable of absorbing infrared radiation, interfering with the ability of this energy to exit the planet back into space. Since the dawn of industry in the mid-1700s, humans have increased atmospheric CO2 by about 50%, mostly through the burning of fossil fuels. With many now working to develop carbon capture technology to slow the climate crisis, I wonder if you know that there is carbon capture technology built into the fabric of our ecosystems. When plants undergo photosynthesis, they convert CO2 gas from the atmosphere into glucose, or sugars, and oxygen. This is called fixing carbon. Due to this valuable ecosystem service, the science community sees plants as part of the answer because of this ability to store or sequester carbon from the atmosphere. In the field of ecology, a plant's productivity is a measure of how much carbon it takes up in photosynthesis. Factors that affect a plant's productivity include variables such as light, temperature, water, humidity, and nutrient availability. There's another player in the game with the ability to enhance a plant's access to nutrients: mycorrhizal fungi. From the Greek myco for fungus and rhiza for root, a mycorrhizal fungus is one that associates with the plant's roots in a symbiotic relationship. The fungus casts a wide network of mycelium capable of absorbing mineral nutrients and water in the soil, which it trades to the plant in exchange for glucose. About 80% of land plants associate with these fungi. I'm completing my capstone research this fall in Dr. Wolf's lab at the Brackenridge Field Laboratory, where I'll examine how the phylogenetic relationships between plants affect the establishment of mycorrhizal fungi. Plants have family trees, just like we do, but the ones we're interested in don't show the relationship between individuals, but rather the relationships between species. At Dr. Wolf's lab, for example, we're focused on 12 different plants, which have been established in varying degrees of phylogenetic relatedness in 144 experimental plots. Note that in these 12 species, Lupinus texensis, or the bluebonnet, for example, is not closely related to Butellua gracilis, blue grama grass. They're like distant cousins. While the Illinois bundleflower is like a phylogenetic sister to the bluebonnet, they both belong to the Fabaceae, or legume family. So why does this study matter? Well, if a relationship can be found between phylogenetic structure in communities and mycorrhizal fungi establishment, it may inform sustainable land management and agriculture practices for the maximization of carbon sequestration, providing us with another powerful tool in the fight against climate change.
Hi, my name is Sophia, and I'm a fourth-year environmental science student at the University of Texas at Austin. And today I'll be talking about my capstone research project on coral adaptation to different environmental changes. So coral reefs, like the one you see here, are built of colonies of coral polyps. And their coral reefs are so important to our marine oceans, our marine ecosystems, because they provide such a huge biodiversity. A lot of like a diverse set of organisms utilize these coral reefs as their habitat to provide food, as their home, like the fish you see here. And so it's important to understand how coral are adapting to these environmental threats that they face currently. And so I want to focus on ocean surface temperature, because that is one of the main threats coral reefs is facing right now. And so in this plot right here, you see on the x-axis years from 1850 to 2012, temperature in Celsius on the y-axis. And so it's showing the combined land and ocean surface temperature average from 1850 to 2012. And in the top plot, you're seeing the yearly average. And in the bottom plot, you're seeing the decade average. And so it's important to note here that in 1950 through 2012, you're seeing this increased accelerated rate of temperature. And that's coral, and coral is facing this temperature increase that is beyond its tolerance range. And so when coral is faced with temperature beyond its tolerance range, you get bleaching events where the coral loses its algae and it turns white. And so why is it important to understand adaptation in coral bleaching? Because a bleached coral is more susceptible to other threats, and this might lead to population decline and potentially to the extreme extinction. And so it's important in my project to understand how coral is adapting to these environmental stressors. So I used transcriptomic data of aquaporicole, which is a species of coral found in the Indo-Pacific. And we looked at this coral in heat stress, high acidification stress, latitudinal different latitudes with different symbionts. And we tried to analyze to see how coral is adapting. So which genes are they using to live and survive in these different stressors? And so what we found is that coral can adapt to thermal and acidification stress at the same time, and that within these two stressors, the coral uses the same sets of genes. And so this is very helpful because then we can then determine that coral uses these genes to adapt, can use these genes to adapt to long-term climate change. And so this is important for coral restoration projects moving forward. It's also important that our public and our policy pushes towards climate change policy so we can reduce our effects that are increasing climate changes. And it's also important for the public to be aware of these unprecedented and accelerated rates of climate change that are occurring. So we can change our behaviors to try and reduce that climate change that is occurring. And then also, again, push for climate change policy. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Hello, my name is Sora Sunby. I am a fourth year EVS major graduating this month, and my capstone project looked at similarities in lizard evolution across the American Southwest. The basis of my project revolved around the idea of convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is when two or more species evolve similar traits separately without a common ancestor that had those traits. An example of convergent evolution can be seen by looking at two winged species of animals native to Austin, the painted bunting seen on the left and the Mexican free-tailed bat seen on the right. Both of these species have wings, but they evolved these wings separately. My project involved studying convergent evolution between 4 different lizard species that occur in the American Southwest. The first species is the Texas horned lizard of TCU fame, the greater earless lizard, who has beautiful colorful features, the Texas spiny lizard, who looks somewhat bland from the top but has wonderful underbelly markings, and finally the ornate tree lizard, who also just has a gorgeous underbelly that I had to include. The premise of my project involved looking at whether the bodies of those 4 species have changed in similar ways as the average rainfall decreases from east to west, as shown in the map on the left. So basically, whether they have experienced convergent evolution or not. For example, I was looking to see if maybe their toe lengths are all shorter in Arizona, where it's really dry, than they are in Texas, where it is wetter in comparison. The pink rectangle on the right shows the region that I was hoping to find any indication of convergent evolution across. This project involved a lot of data collection. I measured a bunch of different parts of around 550 lizards. Examples of measurements I took were the tail length, body width, and the head length. It was really neat to learn about natural history collections and how lizards are stored. For example, in the leftmost photo, you can see that a lot of lizards are stored in jars, and in the middle photo, they are stored in these huge buckets. I am currently still working on the analysis portion of my project, but the preliminary results have shown that there is some great potential for ending up with interesting results. I would like to thank Dr. Travis Leduc for being my capstone mentor and putting in so much of his own time to help me. I would like to thank Christopher, Britt, and Sophia for helping me enormously with the analysis that has been conducted so far, Dr. Gillespie for helping to put on this event, and A&M and UTEP for loaning out specimens for my project. And here are the image credits.
The next set of videos that you'll be presented with are from students in the geography track. We hope you enjoy.
I'm Clayton Ferris, and my capstone project aims to assess land cover changes in relation to socioeconomic factors in Houston, Texas. By analyzing changes in both physical land cover and population demographics simultaneously, the expected outcome is to reveal correlations between land management and socioeconomic characteristics. In this video, I will discuss the 2 types of data that I am using, my data manipulation processes for each, and what comes next in this ongoing project. My project is using data taken from Landsat satellites, which capture remotely sensed images that provide data along both the visible and invisible light spectrums. Land cover types in Houston were identified using the characteristics of the Earth revealed by Landsat imagery, analyzing imagery from 2010 and 2020. The online software Google Earth Engine was used to process and manipulate the chosen Landsat data. Multiple layers of Landsat imagery were analyzed to identify a comprehensive list of land cover types in Houston. These land cover types were then assigned to 6 broad land cover classes: water, bare soil and sparse vegetation, grass, trees, residences, and impervious development. To assess Houston's socioeconomic changes, 2010 and 2020 demographic data from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey was used. Income, poverty, renter-occupied or owner-occupied, family or non-family household, race, and ethnicity were the chosen demographic factors. And while these are organized by census tracts, a goal of this project is to analyze changes at a possibly more revealing geographic level: Houston's super neighborhoods. Houston officially recognizes regions of common community through drawn boundaries, creating what Houston calls super neighborhoods, which may offer a better glimpse into population dynamics than arbitrarily drawn census lines. Using ARC software, Houston's 644 census tracts were aggregated according to Houston's 88 super neighborhoods. This project is still ongoing, and the next step in data manipulation is to divide up the land cover classifications using Houston's 88 super neighborhoods. The analysis will involve detecting both changes in land cover and changes in socioeconomics from 2010 to 2020. Increases in impervious development, along with decreases in the grass and tree classes, are hypothesized to correlate with poverty and marginalized socioeconomic groups. The conclusion of this project could demonstrate the need to analyze physical land cover and population demographics, not in isolation, but together, to reveal broader pictures about how land management affects and is affected by socioeconomic characteristics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the UT Environmental Science Film Festival. My name is Emily Mim, and I will be presenting my research, which is biodynamics in African savanna ecosystems. And so you may be wondering, what is a savanna ecosystem? So a savanna is essentially a tropical grassland with warm temperatures year-round. And so a savanna is unique because there is a strong variation of rainfall patterns, with the highest being in the summer and the lowest being in the winter. And so these changes in rainfall patterns also create very dynamic vegetation patterns. So within a savanna, there's a high population of grasslands and shrubs, but a very low population of trees. And so because these winter months in savannas are very dry, it leads to a lot of wildfires. And that is what I'm going to be examining specifically within my research. So my study area that I looked at was the country of Botswana, which, as you can see on this map on the left, is just north of South Africa. And within Botswana, there is a vast desert savanna ecosystem, and the Kalahari Desert comprises about 70% of the land area. So this is a significant portion of the country of Botswana. And so why would we study the savanna ecosystem in Botswana? Well, there's a lot of industries that are very important to Botswana, but also this ecosystem is very similar to Austin, Texas. So when we're looking at some of the problems and management issues in Botswana, these can also potentially be applied to our home city of Austin. So why do we study fires in Botswana? Why is it important? So Botswana supports a large ranching industry. And so what happens when fires occur is that it changes the vegetation and the capacity to hold certain grazing animals. And so when vegetation changes, this can have a large impact on the local economy. So what I did to look at some of these trees and data and how it changed over time is I used what is called remote sensing. And so this is essentially using satellite images that were flown by drones and some taken by satellites. This was specifically using drone imageries, but these were flown across the Kalahari Desert to look at what trees were dead before a fire and what trees were dead after a fire. So before the research, there was a suspicion that some more trees were actually dead prior to the fire than we originally thought. And so we were looking at these collapsed trees, which are indicated by the blue dots, and the live trees, which are indicated by the yellow dots. And so these images were taken, and then they were also fed into a computer coding system called Google Earth Engine. And this essentially just sorted all of the data based on what is the bare ground, what is trees, and what is vegetation. And so overall, what we found based on the results and looking at the trees from the fires is that there's a high volume of trees within the Kalahari Desert region that were actually collapsed before the fire. And so this actually impacts the livestock ranching community, because if these trees are already dead, this impacts certain vegetation that is actually encroached in the area and shrubs and those kinds of things. So for future research, it is important to look at what is actually causing some of these collapses besides fire, and what impact might overgrazing of ranching have on this community and the future ability to support this large ranching industry in Botswana. Thank you very much.
A great way to study history, especially environmental history, is by investigating land use through time. Now, some of you may be asking, how does that work? What is land use information, and how can it help us better understand the past? Well, different cases call for different tools, but here's a taste of how land use can help us interpret history. Here's a land use history of the island of St. John in 150 seconds or less. In the year 1717, the Danish formally settled the islands of St. John along with St. Thomas and St. Croix to create what would be known for the next 200 years as the Danish West Indies. By 1730, the island had been divided up into 100 plantations, and a diverse agricultural economy, made possible by African slaves, began to develop. A slave revolt in 1733 and the rising demand for sugar prompted farmers to consolidate their land ownings and focus growing efforts on a single staple: sugar. From 1740 to 1760, the number of plantations on the island dropped from 110 to 83. Over 1,300 acres of sugar were planted. This marked the beginning of what we can call St. John's sugar monoculture era. In the year 1800, St. John had 65 plantations, and 91.9% of the island and the crops are sugar. Over 3,000 acres of sugar on a 13,000-acre island. In 1833, the nearby British Virgin Islands outlawed slavery, and dozens of St. Johnian slaves escaped to the BVI. Between 1833 and 1852, the island population dropped 57%, and the dwindling number of slaves quickly made sugar production unsustainable. This marks the beginning of the plantation decline era. In 1867, a series of natural disasters finally collapsed the sugar economy. By 1895, only 4% of St. John was under cultivation, the lowest in 120 years. To reboot the island economy, planters began parceling out their land to former workers and began farming cattle and sheep. By 1905, St. John had 220 plantations, 80% of which were being used for sheep and cattle by area. By this time, the economy had transitioned from sugar to livestock, charcoal, and bay oil. In the year 1917, the United States purchased the Danish West Indies for $25 million in gold coins. The cattle industry reached its peak in 1930, but by 1950, the agricultural economy had all but died. This was the beginning of St. John's current economic era, the tourism era. In 1956, the Department of the Interior designated 60% of the island of St. John as a U.S. national park. Since then, the island has developed into a popular tropical resort destination. In 2019, 1.7 million tourists arrived at St. John and St. Thomas. This industry has come with a major increase in urban coastal development that poses a potential threat to the regional watershed, the health of local coral, fishes, and other wildlife. While we may not know what happens next for the island of St. John, we know the way we use the land will continue to determine its place in history. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.
We're now going to take a quick break for a short intermission.
Grab a snack, grab some tea, drinks, whatever you want, just settle in for a few more videos.
Hi, my name is Jessica Richards. I'm a senior environmental science student at the University of Texas at Austin. In the next 3 minutes, you will learn how arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi has the potential to help legume plants survive drought occurrences. Having had an interest in the proprietary power of fungi since a young age, from my time spent foraging for mushrooms with my grandparents, I brainstormed ways that they could be used to help society in this new age of increasing climate change-induced droughts, which is pictured in this bar graph. My focus turned to arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AMF for short. AMF are soil microorganisms that are able to form mutualistic symbioses with many plants on land. It assists in the exchange of nutrients, like nitrogen and water, from the soil to the plant by attaching to the roots. The benefits of AMF for plants in drought conditions is not well researched yet, despite having the potential to save naturally occurring and agricultural plants. I am currently piloting a greenhouse study to analyze how legume species, like clover and vetch, use their water and carbon to ensure survival when placed under 3 different drought severities. Half of the plants had AMF put into the soil and the other half did not, allowing me to determine whether the plants benefited from the AMF. I ultimately hypothesized that plants with AMF will grow larger amounts of above and below ground biomass due to increased water use efficiency and carbon fixation, which is the process whereby plants turn carbon dioxide into organic compounds like carbohydrates. Now, this idea came from the overarching angle of food security in the United States and how crops are facing destruction due to drought. When crop yield decreases, produce, wheat, corn and soy products, and meat products all decrease as well, creating food insecurity. Here is a clip of a Utah farmer's experience in the 2021 drought.
Martini. That corn there where I can't water it, don't have the water, makes me sick to see it go to heck like that.
With limits on amount and time, he says there isn't enough flow to make it across his fields. While some of the corn is drying up, he's had to let this whole field of barley go.
That hurts, buddy. That hurts.
All after he's put the work in.
AMF has the potential to change the way the U.S. approaches agricultural practices in order to preserve food security and decrease the problem of crop die-off due to drought in agricultural-heavy states like California, Utah, and Idaho. Based on the results of this study, I would like to see myself or other researchers replicate my study on a larger scale with staple crop species such as corn, wheat, and soy. It is estimated that 90% of all land plants live in symbioses with fungi, or at least are able to. Thus, translating this organism's properties to agricultural crops is a logical step. The verification of which plant species benefit from AMF in drought conditions may lead to changes in agricultural practices to help prevent crop destruction. Thanks for listening in.
Hello, my name is Joshua Vasquez, and I'm the creator of this film. Before I start talking about my research, I want to introduce the study area, which is located in northwestern Belize. This area is known as the Rio Bravo watershed, and it's a place where the ancient Maya lived at for hundreds of years. This place is considered a tropical environment, with lush green vegetation, high biodiversity, warm temperatures, and significant amounts of rainfall throughout the year. For the ancient Maya, they were able to live in this environment by constructing agricultural fields in parts of the Rio Bravo watershed that contained tropical wetlands. But these wetland fields were only recently discovered by using a method called LIDAR. Put simply, LIDAR shoots down laser beams that can penetrate forest canopies and generate an image of the Earth's surface, as seen in this image here. To learn more about the significance of studying these wetland fields, I interviewed Byron Smith, a PhD student and my research partner who studies the ancient Maya environment. When I asked him about the importance of wetlands to the ancient Maya, Byron went on to say this.
So one thing that we may see when we look at the environmental record, and specifically the Maya and wetlands, is that we may see a greater dependence on these wetlands during times where water is scarce. And I think that's what makes wetlands so important to the Maya.
By using a computer program called ArcGIS, we were able to use the LiDAR data to create a digital elevation model, which is an image that represents the surface of the Earth without above-ground features such as canopy and vegetation cover. With the digital elevation model, we were able to calculate the direction and accumulation of water flow to create this hydraulic modeling image here, which represents small to larger size streams. We were also able to create a wetness index, which represents both dry and wet areas. The results of the wetness index showed the location of a well-known wetland field known as Birds of Paradise, which shows promising signs of the strength of ArcGIS in modeling wetland fields. Heading into the future, this research will use these results and other parameters to run the final suitability analysis for wetland fields in the ancient Maya environment of northwestern Belize.
Hello, my name is Lillian Sachitano, and my capstone research project investigates the vegetation fluctuations in response to climate change on an interannual time series along the precipitation gradient in Botswana, Africa. That's a lot of jargon, so let's break it down together. Botswana is a country in southern Africa that experiences a similar climate to Austin, Texas. However, the Kalahari Desert occupies a large portion of the landscape. As you move from northern Botswana to its southern tip, precipitation frequency and vegetation productivity gradually decrease. This is what's referred to as the precipitation gradient. The image you see is of the Okavango Delta, and it lies at the top of the precipitation gradient, being one of the most biodiverse and prolific locations in Botswana. Through the use of Google Earth Engine, I gathered Landsat satellite images of this location in 2015 and in 2020 at relatively the same time of the year so that I could better see the changes in vegetation over that 5-year period. You're currently looking at the 2015 image and now the 2020 image. I ultimately chose 7 land cover classes that I thought best represented the landscape I was working with. These classes can be seen in the legend on the left. In order to perform a classification, I zoomed into these images so that I could select individual pixels that I believed best represented each of my classes. I'd choose a pixel in the river to represent water, a sandy pixel in the middle of the desert to represent bare ground, and so on, until I had roughly 30 pixels for each of my 7 classes. At this point, I had enough example data to train the program, so I just asked the computer to classify the rest of the pixels that I had not done. This is the resulting classification for 2015, and here you'll notice a ton of water-fed vegetation, the most photosynthetically productive plant material found in Botswana. And here you can see the classification for 2020. Less water-fed vegetation in the delta and more water pixels, as less woody vegetation equals more water exposure. That's a lot of change between 5 years. It's important that we're researching this topic as the people of Botswana largely grow all the food that they consume and will raise crops or livestock to sell for their livelihoods. This makes them very reliant on the seasonal rain patterns that their country will experience. As the adverse effects of climate change are making precipitation patterns more intense and variable each year, it is now more important than ever to better understand the variations of vegetation in Botswana so that its natives can continue to live in this unique portion of the world. Thank you so much for your time.
My name is Michelle Marino, a junior environmental science student at the University of Texas at Austin. History has oftentimes biased teachings of ancient civilizations. However, multiple ancient civilizations had complex relationships with the environment and other societies. In the southern part of Mexico, the state of Tabasco is filled with dense forests and archaeological sites. These vast archaeological structures belong to Olmec and ancient Mayan societies. These and other archaeological evidence has indicated that wetland fields play an important part of ancient Mesoamerican infrastructure.
Wetlands have some of the highest biodiversity and ecosystem functions on the planet, and they've been places where humans have been attracted since the dawn of humanity, from our earliest ancestors to even the species that made us up before Homo sapiens sapiens. So we have these clear connections. They also have connections with environmental change, and they have connections with how people were able to adapt to environmental change in the past. So we have lots of examples in this case of how the Maya used wetlands during times of drought and created wetlands as well. Also for heavy production. The initial research on wetlands came out of the basin of Mexico, around Mexico City. And where it came from was by people who came in, the Spanish who came in, and they noticed that people were using wetlands and growing crops on them, and very high crops. Research over time, as well as observation, showed that more than half of the food that the Aztecs, the Mixteca peoples, came from wetland agriculture. Another part of that came from upland agriculture. But the wetlands played a very, very large role in basic subsistence.
Light detection and ranging technology, also known as LiDAR, is a method that uses light pulsed from lasers to measure the shape of the Earth. LiDAR has helped verify wetlands that are under tropical forest or difficult to access in field research. However, there are still wetland systems to be identified. A way of doing this is by performing a site suitability model to identify areas where wetlands could potentially be found. For my study, LiDAR modeling was carried out using ArcGIS. The model used topography, slope, wetness index, vegetation cover, and location of Maya sites. LiDAR scanning shows widespread canal systems characterized by rectilinear features that change the landscape in such a large scale that they remain today. These changes to the landscape is hypothesized to have led to an increase in CO2 and methane from the burning and expanding of wetlands during the late Holocene. Wetland and canal system identification is the basis for future ground verification and further soil analysis. Modeling potential wetland fields in the study can be utilized for other areas where Mesoamerican societies relied on wetland systems for sustenance, such as Belize and other southern states in Mexico.
Hello, my name is Quinai, and I'm a third-year environmental science student. I plan on doing my capstone project on the City of Austin, Texas's management plan for the invasive water plant hydrilla. Hydrilla is an invasive species that can grow quickly in darker waters and outcompete native plants by growing on top of them and blocking their access to sunlight. Hydrilla were first introduced to Lake Austin in the 90s, likely due to spread from the Mississippi River, and have persisted in our water systems ever since, spreading to other parts of the Texas-Colorado River. The reason hydrilla spread easily is because they propagate via stem fragments, turion, and subterranean tubers. As you can see in this graphic, they latch on quickly to boats and they can be introduced to bodies of water through disposing aquarium plants. They quickly outcompete native vegetation, and this continues their spread. So in the year 2000, the City of Austin created a management plan that combined the usage of herbicides and grass carp to treat the invasive spread of hydrilla. Instead of just eating hydrilla, grass carp have eaten all the plants in Lake Austin. This poses another environmental problem of how to reintroduce more plants. So as you can see, in 1999, hydrilla are in these areas. And after the implementation of the City of Austin management plan, they have been confined to these areas. To eradicate hydrilla quickly, grass carp are oftentimes introduced, and cities must weigh the trade-offs between getting rid of hydrilla quickly and reducing biodiversity for a period of time. I chose this capstone idea because I wanted to combine biogeography and hydrology, two of my favorite classes. I also wanted to include an environmental monitoring section in my research methods. So I want to do an environmental censoring project that incorporates citizen science or science that has been collected by people like you and me, who are not necessarily researchers or scientists. The City of Austin Management Plan is more than 20 years old at this point. My research could aid in updating the plan in the upcoming years and reestablishing vegetation in lakes.
Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm a senior here at UT Austin studying environmental science in the geography track. My senior thesis capstone project is focused in Botswana, a country in southern Africa with a savanna-like ecosystem. It is in this country that I have selected 9 wildfires in 2017 to study through the use of satellite imagery. In my research study, I worked with 3 satellites to answer the question: how can we use satellites to show when an ecosystem is back to normal after a wildfire has occurred? I measured this by calculating the normalized burn ratio of each wildfire. This mathematical ratio produces a number between 0 and 1 to describe how burnt the landscape is. I used this measuring tactic, which involved the manipulation of various components of the electromagnetic spectrum, because one cannot tell the severity of a burnt ecosystem through solely the naked eye. Next, I used the coding platform called Google Earth Engine to calculate the burn ratio of each wildfire, and I displayed the results through satellite images of the landscape. As you can see here, each wildfire was observed through a true color image, also known as a bird's eye view, and an NBR image, in which the most severely burned portions of the fire were easily distinguished from the unburned areas. It was these severely burned areas of each fire, as seen here in purple, that were used to measure how long the landscape would take to return back to normal. The study resulted in the fact that there was not a standard amount of days for the return to normal time period as I had hoped. I did, however, find that each satellite system had its own pattern, as some described the burned landscape as bouncing back significantly longer than other satellites, the biggest difference being in a 111-day gap. This was a very important discovery, as other researchers should be aware of this difference in time when conducting their own research and picking what satellites to use for their future. I used Landsat 8, Sentinel-2, and MODIS for my research. Now you might be wondering, why does this matter? Why study wildfires? Wildfires are very common in Botswana and are a great hazard to the lifestyles of many people that live there. If we can study the characteristics of fires in addition to their aftermath, then scientists can be better prepared to give recommendations to the local people of Botswana about developing land for agriculture and using fire as a tool for controlled burns around their communities. Although I have completed my capstone, I am still exploring the complexities of these fires, and I hope to someday go to Botswana to see the results for myself. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Shrikri, and I'm an environmental science major in my 4th year at UT Austin. For my research project, I looked at environmental justice and how that should impact enforcement by government agencies. The environmental justice movement is about advocating for the people as well as the planet. Environmental burdens such as landfills and hazardous waste facilities, as shown in these pictures, are disproportionately located near marginalized communities. The environmental justice movement seeks to not only raise awareness of these issues, but to advocate for better policies. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is responsible for enforcing the federal and state laws designed to protect our environment and our health. They carry out enforcement actions when a company or individual violates environmental regulations. Examples of a violation could be exceeding the limit of pollution or using outdated appliances. If environmental justice was truly factored into consideration, then communities that are disproportionately represented in the neighborhoods around facilities, such as Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, marginalized communities, should also be disproportionately represented in neighborhoods around facilities that receive an environment enforcement action from the TCEQ. To comply with the definition of environmental justice, no one community should be favored or neglected by the government. For my project, I used geographic information systems to map the location of facilities with an enforcement action from TCEQ. I wanted to look for spatial patterns in relation to the population characteristics such as race, education, and income. I picked 5 counties in the cities of El Paso, Amarillo, Dallas, Houston, and Austin. Up here, I have the maps for Travis County in Austin on the left and Harris County in Houston on the right. One area of interest was to see which facilities had multiple enforcement actions throughout my 5-year study period. For this, I focused on Harris County. As you can see in the map, there is a clear spatial pattern. The facilities with multiple enforcement actions are located in the southeastern part of the county, and these are also the facilities that have the most enforcement actions, up to 11 in over 5 years. It is unclear, however, if there is any correlation with a socioeconomic variable. It was very difficult to obtain the data, and this shows that the TCQ is not already conducting environmental justice analysis to ensure fair treatment. Environmental justice should be included in the TCQ's penalty policy to determine higher penalties if this is already a community severely impacted by pollution or other environmental burdens. Texas is one of the states that is not doing this analysis, and the TCQ needs to improve its enforcement action policies. Thank you so much for attending my presentation. I would like to thank several people without whom this would not have been possible. Dr. Harrigan was my mentor in the UT School of Law. Adrian, Corey, Anthony, and Raish all helped me with obtaining data. Sarah, Dr. Beach, and Dr. Miller from the geography department here all helped me in planning out my research and in determining what GIS analyses I should be conducting. Lastly, I would like to thank my friends for helping me manipulate Excel and get the data into a workable format. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Anne, and I'll be presenting to you today the topic of floods. Please enjoy. Welcome to my little film. Today I would like to first talk about the box. Now, if you live in Austin, you live in a box. It's not sturdy, but it literally surrounds you at all times. And as they say, you should think outside the box when trying to think of creative solutions. The box you are in is water. Water is always with you. Well, actually, most of the time it's inside your body, but in this case, it's all the rivers and streams that surround us. And just like the water in your body, the water in our environment is very important and very powerful. And as a good bonus, it's really pleasant to look at, and this is especially true when comparing my drawings to the real thing. As we build more man-made boxes for people to live and work in, we're neglecting to care for the natural box and resources that Mother Nature made for us. Austin is super urban, meaning that the city is very modern and industrialized, and the population grows rapidly year to year. With more urban areas popping up so often, more concrete, roofs, sidewalk, etc. are being put down all the time. Water can't infiltrate through concrete and such material as it can with soil, so most water from rain just stays as running current on the surface, and this leads to a lot more frequent and a lot more devastating floods. Look at this sign. It might seem a little mundane to you who live in the area, but that's probably because you see it almost anywhere you go. And that alone is honestly a good enough implication of how prominent floods are, if warning signs are posted in almost every part of the city. If you go to UT Austin and are on campus whenever there is rain, you'll notice that Waller Creek runs much faster, much more aggressively, and the water level rises very quickly, almost to an alarming amount. So it's really easy to see how powerful floodwaters can be when a creek that is relatively mundane and small when compared to giants like Bull Creek in the watershed system can quickly become overwhelming. One of the biggest reasons for problems like these nowadays is urbanization. But obviously the urban expansion isn't going to stop anytime soon as more and more people migrate to the city from domestic and international locations. So that's not the greatest way to go about it. So I think a better way to go about it is just to educate more people about the building consequences of their daily actions. And while it may seem like a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, many in the past have thought that it wouldn't happen to them. And the time that it took for the thought to form is more than enough time for their life to change. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Joseph Schmidt, and today I will be talking to you about aquifers and subsidence. The world is running out of fresh water. You might be asking how this is happening. Is the water going into space? Is it being stolen by aliens? Are we drinking too much water? The answer to all of these questions is no. The real cause for this loss comes from overpumping our aquifers. If you don't know, an aquifer is a reservoir of water located beneath the ground. Of all the fresh water in the world, 30% can be found in aquifers. To put this into perspective, that's roughly 100 times more fresh water than all surface sources combined. With so much water being available underground, tapping into these sources is an enticing prospect for those who don't live near surface bodies or have excessive water needs like farmers. For these people, reliance on aquifers is essential to livelihoods. However, over-reliance can lead to over-extraction, which leads to losses in an aquifer's storage capacity. In any aquifer, storage capacity is equivalent to the pore space within the rocks that form the aquifer, and it is in that pore space that water resides. Water in pores plays an important role in maintaining an aquifer structure. Similarly to air in a balloon, water keeps an aquifer from collapsing in on itself. When too much water is removed, an aquifer gets compacted, and subsidence, or a decrease in ground level elevation, occurs. Subsidence can be damaging to infrastructure, causing cracks in roads, bridges, and pipelines, but most importantly, subsidence reduces the amount of pore space in an aquifer, lessening its storage capacity. When an aquifer undergoes subsidence, the lost pore space is gone permanently. By reducing the storage capacity of an aquifer, we lose valuable reservoir space on our planet. In lieu of growing agricultural demands from global warming, rising populations, and increasing industry, the stress put on our water supply is only going to increase over the next century. If good groundwater management practices are not established soon, then we will literally be squeezing our aquifers dry. In my own research, I hope to identify the rate at which pore space is created by plant root weathering, and to use that information to guide water extraction practices. Knowing the rate at which pore space is created, as well as the rates at which water is extracted, are key to understanding and preventing subsidence events. I hope to have passed on the significance aquifers have and how it is important to practice good groundwater management strategies. Our fresh water may be renewable, but its storage space is certainly not.
Hi, my name is Sarah Gianotti, and I'm majoring in environmental science with a specialization in geography, and I'm excited to share with you my presentation about the future of environmentally displaced people. I'd like to add the disclaimer that this presentation is an overview of my future capstone project that I will complete over the course of this summer and fall. I'll begin by discussing sudden impact disasters and slow onset events. Slow onset events are defined as gradual changes in climate that can dramatically impact landscapes. This includes the landmass becoming more dry, rainier, or colder. This type of event occurs over a long period of time and can permanently impact human settlement. Meanwhile, sudden impact disasters are severe weather events that continue to become stronger and more frequent as the climate becomes warmer. Some examples of slow onset events include droughts and sea level rise. On the other hand, wildfires, hurricanes, and floods are examples of sudden impact disasters. This is where the concept of environmentally displaced peoples come into effect. Environmentally displaced people, EDP for short, are people who are forced to leave their homes due to environmental factors. These can be slow onset or sudden impact events. This is an example of environmental justice issue, as countries and communities with the most impact are the ones that contribute the least to global warming. These communities have the least resources to improve their environmental conditions, so they are in the most need of help. Temporary protected status is a clause within the American Immigration Act of 1990, which provides refuge to people around the world who have been affected by major environmental disasters or war. Since its introduction, 25 countries have been accepted for the TPS protection. It is not meant to be a permanent measure and does not have a pathway for citizenship. In my project, I will look at 2 countries who have applied for TPS, the first of which is Nicaragua. Nicaragua was granted TPS protection in 1999 after Hurricane Mitch, which devastated 1/5 of their population. Meanwhile, the Philippines applied for TPS back in 2013 after a catastrophic typhoon Haiyan. This typhoon displaced over 4 million people, but their application for TPS was never accepted or denied. These two examples highlight some of the most common issues within TPS policy. There are many strict eligibility requirements that the country in disaster has to meet before their citizens can be granted TPS. This is possibly why the Philippines were never given refuge despite their massive damage done to their country and people. Another issue lies in the timeframes of return in an immigrant's home country. This is standard policy where refuge is from 6 months to a year and a half. While many countries have evaded this timeframe due to continuous threats within their home country or an inability for their home country to rebuild. This has led to thousands of TPS recipients creating productive lives within the US and practically becoming full-blood Americans, despite an eventual deportation. This is evident in how the Nicaraguan immigrants have resided in the United States for over 20 years. The last issue within TPS is that slow onset events are not included within the legislation. With the continuation of climate change, more and more people will be permanently displaced from their home and in need of complete immigration to another country. The US does not have a policy for situations like these, despite the growing need. Throughout my coming research, I will interview TPS recipients, conduct a literary analysis, and review legislation in America and abroad that can lead to possible solutions. Climate change affects everyone, and the US needs to be ready to take a place in finding solutions for those who are the most vulnerable. I hope you all enjoyed my presentation and learned a little bit more about environmentally displaced people. Thank you.
Last but not least, you'll see a few videos from people in the geology track.
People from Central Texas know that cedar fever is a real threat. But beyond allergies, these trees have been using a disproportionate amount of water compared to other native plants.
For my project, I wanted to look into what would happen if cedar trees were selectively removed from our property with regards to plant hydraulics. Once these water suckers were gone, would other trees show less stress related to water availability? To test this, I looked at sap flux and leaf water potential values of specific trees before, during, and after the removal of the cedars. Sap flux describes the amount of water that is moving through the xylem or sapwood of a tree, and the leaf water potential describes how much stress a plant is under in relation to water. To measure leaf water potential, first you must take a fresh clipping of a leaf. Then you place a leaf inside of a pressure chamber and pump gas into it. Eventually, water will start coming out of the stem. The amount of pressure in the chamber at this point indicates the amount of stress the plant has. Higher pressure, higher stress. As for sap flux, we measure it using sap flux sensors. These sensors utilize thermal tracers or measuring the temperature difference of water between 2 points. At the bottom, heat is injected in order to maintain a constant temperature. Then the temperature is recorded again in the top needle. This one isn't temperature controlled, so we can understand how much heat is lost as the water moves up through the tree. Using some fancy equations, we can quantify the volume of water that moves through the tree. A fun part of this project is that we got to build these sensors ourselves. It isn't too hard, as long as you have patience, and it saves a lot of money in the long run. It also lets us take readings for way more trees since it's super cost efficient, meaning that there's a good bit of data to work with. The data is constantly recorded and uploaded to a computer, so we have a continuous record for sap flux, unlike leaf water potential. For that, we had to drive out to West Texas to measure it by hand. We compared these sap flux and leaf water potential data to the microclimate data recorded via the eddy covariance tower. We should be able to see a trend over time where the trees display less stress. As for the results, well, sometimes in science, things don't go as planned. Your dataset could be too small, your results could be inconclusive, or there could even be issues with your data collection process outside of your control. In my case, all of these things happened. But that's another thing about science. It doesn't have to end after a 2-semester research project. There's plenty more work being done to understand these relationships, and I can't wait to see what is discovered.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my video abstract.
So my project is about cryogenic extraction, specifically in clay soils. So first, what is cryogenic extraction? It's a method that scientists and researchers use to extract water from plants and soils. But why would they want to do this? Well, after the water is removed from a soil or plant sample, we can run a test on it to get what is called the isotopic value of water. These are oxygen and hydrogen isotopic values, and they are like fingerprints. Each value holds a wealth of information about the surrounding environment, both past and present. For example, in plants, we can understand how and where they're getting their water from. And in soils, we can begin to understand how water is moving and fluctuating in the natural world. So, how does this process work? First, we'll load soil samples into tubes and connect them to the system. We will then heat these samples to release the water. Then, the evaporating water is pulled by a vacuum pressure onto an empty vial on the other side of the system. This vial is submerged in a cold bath, which instantly freezes the water we collected from the soil sample for later isotopic evaluation. Let's watch this video of the real system. First, you can see my clay samples are loaded up, and the water in those samples is being pulled through the connected tubes and landing in each collection vial. The collection vial is submerged in an alcohol solution, which is extremely cold, below 90 degrees Celsius. This freezes the water. When I'm done, I will let the water thaw and run an isotopic analysis. So, what's the problem and what am I experimenting with? The problem is that cryogenic extraction does not work very well in clay soil. Why? We aren't really sure yet. And my project aims to explore this, to see if we can successfully extract water from clay soil. In order to do this, I'll explore two different hypotheses. One, by running a hotter and longer extraction, all the water that is stuck in the clay soils will be extracted. But two, too much of the heating could damage the soil structure of the clay, causing it to latch onto water, making the isotopic values incorrect. So a lot of my data is still being processed and collected. I don't actually have the results yet, but what could a successful or failed results mean? If I am unsuccessful, researchers may be able to become more informed by my mistakes. Every failure is a learning opportunity in science. But if I am successful in being able to get correct isotopic values from clays, we can gain a wide range of new knowledge about how water on our planet moves. This is especially impactful in the time of climate change, when we are experiencing longer droughts and seeking to gain increased global water security. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.
Well, that concludes our program for this evening. We wanted to thank you so much for hanging out with us for a couple hours. We hope that you were able to unlock a new passion, find a new interest, or simply just enjoy watching all of our hard work crammed into 3 minutes.
I really enjoyed it. Did you?
I'm so glad to be finished with it.
We want to give a last thank you and a shout out to Haley for all of your effort and hard work you've helped us through. You've been a great teacher, and I hope you enjoyed watching our presentations as well. Everyone, thank you so much, and hook 'em.